pánové, dobrý den, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think we can start our lecture. First of all, I wish to welcome you all warmly at the premises of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for coming. My name is Medaglia. I'm the head of the United Nations Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our today's guest, the Director General of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons of the OPCW, Mr. Ahmet Üzümcü. Excellency, welcome to you as well, of course. I would like to introduce His Excellency quite briefly, although his CV is very rich. Mr. Üzümcü has had an excellent career as a Turkish diplomat before taking up his function as Director General of the OPCW. He has inter alia served as a staff member of NATO in the interesting period between 1989 until 1994. He has been Ambassador of Turkey to Israel. He has served as permanent representative of Turkey to NATO, and also, not least, he has been permanent representative of Turkey to the United Nations office at Geneva. Mr. Üzümcü has been appointed Director General of OPCW for his first term in July 2010, and he has been reappointed for a second term in December 2013. Today's lecture will consist of, first of all, the statement given by His Excellency Ahmet Üzümcü, and then you will have the opportunity to pose any questions you may wish to Director General. So in the course of the lecture you can already think of anything you may wish to ask. We need to finish before 5:30 into the subsequent program of Mr. Üzümcü. Last but not least, let me also thank the Center for European Security of the Institute for International Relations, who have helped us organize and assisted in preparation of today's event. Mr. Üzümcü,
thank you, Veronica. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in Prague and to be here this afternoon before such an esteemed audience. Prague has witnessed many upheavals over its more than 1,000-year history. Though it was spared the ravages of World War II, the war's legacy left an indelible imprint on the Czech people as it did on Europe as a whole. It ended a destructive and horrific war, but it also divided the European continent into two opposing camps during the Cold War. For many years, your country was at the front line of the very real possibility of a devastating war which could involve weapons of mass destruction. How much things have changed since the end of the Cold War became especially clear on 5th April 2009. On that day, you will recall, before 20,000 people at Gradčany Castle, President Obama held out a commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. Since then, we have seen the New START treaty concluded, reducing nuclear warheads to historic lows between former cold adversaries. While this is a positive development, disarmament efforts more broadly have not lived up to the great hopes engendered by the end of the Cold War. But there has been one notable exception. The most enduring disarmament dividend from the end of the Cold War was the global effort to eliminate chemical weapons. This came in the form of the first treaty to not only ban an entire class of weapons of mass destruction, but also to verify its implementation, namely the Chemical Weapons Convention. And since it entered into force in 1997, we have seen extraordinary progress towards reaching the goal of a world free of chemical weapons. In only 18 years, 87% of the world's declared chemical weapons across 98% of the world's population and territory have been verified as destroyed. That is more than 61,000 tons of 72,500 metric tons which were declared. In my remarks here today, I hope to account for this remarkable success from three broad but closely related perspectives on the Chemical Weapons Convention: the historical, the normative, and the operational. I will also try to map out where we need to focus on our attention now to ensure the continuity of our record of achievement well into the future. I intend to do so in a way that especially relates to diplomats and foreign policy experts, for many of you here are the drivers of the source of agreements that our broader communities rely on for a safer future. Looking back over the history of chemical disarmament, the Chemical Weapons Convention was in many ways the beneficiary of exceptionally good timing. It was negotiated in earnest over the course of the 1980s, a decade that saw several propitious developments. Foremost among these was a new spirit of cooperation between the United States and the Soviet Union, and later the Russian Federation in the twilight of the Cold War. With some 88% of estimated global stockpiles of chemical weapons between them, their agreement was crucial, especially on a commitment to eliminating all existing stocks. In the course of negotiations and bilateral consultations between Russia and the United States, this was not always going to be the case. At the same time, persistent use of chemical weapons in the Iran-Iraq war worked to spur negotiators on to achieve the most comprehensive outcome possible. Even without the direct impact of social media at that time, reports and graphic images of some of the most terrible chemical attacks caused a public outcry. The massacre of civilian residents in Halabja by Saddam Hussein's force in 1988 has become emblematic of the inhumane and indiscriminate nature of chemical weapons. But these events had deeper roots that also focused on the minds of negotiators. The fact that several of the world's major chemical producing countries had inadvertently supplied materials to weapon programs in Iraq and Syria, and possibly elsewhere, set alarm bells ringing. This showed that chemical weapons, because of the networks required to develop them in some countries, were a global problem that needed a global response. All of these historical factors played a crucial role in facilitating a broader, all-encompassing approach, one that was patently lacking in previous attempts to ban chemical weapons. In particular, this approach drew important lessons from the shortcomings of the 1925 Geneva Protocol and earlier the 1899 Hague Convention. These shortcomings were twofold. First, they banned only the use of chemical weapons, not the weapons themselves. And second, they lacked any enforcement mechanism holding states parties to their commitments. On the normative side, what came out of negotiations at the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva more than adequately covered these gaps. The Chemical Weapons Convention is truly comprehensive in scope. It prohibits not only the use of chemical weapons, but also their development, production, acquisition, stockpiling, retention, and transfer. For their part, states parties to the Convention must take the steps necessary to enforce this prohibition in respect of all persons and entities within their jurisdiction. And the Convention has specific provisions for addressing non-compliance, ranging from suspension of rights and privileges under the Convention to imposition of sanctions under international law. As importantly, the Convention enjoys a unique combination of provisions that make it stand apart from other disarmament treaties. Not only do all of its rights and obligations apply to all states parties equally, the Convention has a tried and tested mechanism for holding states parties to their obligations. President Reagan's frequent injunction in 1980s, Trust but Verify, was heeded closely by the authors of the Chemical Weapons Convention. As a result, the Convention's international verification regime is the gold standard among multilateral disarmament agreements, and remains so even after almost 2 decades. This is in large part because it's the product of what were intensive consultations between policymakers, scientists, and industry representatives. Since 1997, our inspectors have conducted more than 5,500 inspections at some 265 chemical weapon-related facilities and more than 2,500 industrial sites in more than 80 countries. They are ready to deploy at short notice across the globe, including most recently to Syria. There is one more fact worth considering from a normative perspective. Near universal adherence to the Convention has long established this treaty as a global norm. With 190 states parties and only 6 countries outside the Convention, the global ban against chemical weapons is effectively enshrined in customary international law. The steadfastness of consensus against these terrible weapons was reaffirmed by the strong international reaction to the confirmed use of sarin in Syria in August 2013. What this shows is that chemical weapons are universally regarded as a taboo, and that the international community is prepared to act to enforce the norm against them. It's with this message that we are pressing states still outside the Convention to join without delay and without preconditions. Encouragingly, Myanmar has heeded this call, having recently ratified the Convention, and Angola is preparing to do so also. We look forward to renewing our engagement with South Sudan, but prospects for Egypt, Israel, and North Korea coming on board in the near future remain relatively dim. This brings me to an operational perspective on the success of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Let me start by filling out some of the statistics I related earlier to demonstrate just how tangible our achievements have been. Among our 190 member states, 8 have declared possession of chemical weapons. 3 of these, India, Albania, and a state party that prefers not to be publicly identified, have completely destroyed their stockpiles. Libya has eliminated its chemical weapons, largely stocks of sulfur mustard, and has only a modest amount of component chemicals still scheduled for destruction. Iraq is in the process of finalizing arrangements for destroying remnants of chemical weapons from its past program under the Saddam regime. In a remarkably short period of time, 98% of Syria's chemical weapons have been destroyed, including all of the stocks of sulfur mustard and sarin precursor chemicals. And the United States and Russia, as holders of by far the world's largest stockpiles, are well on track to completing destruction operations by 2023 and probably earlier. So far, they have achieved elimination of 90% and 87% of their respective chemical weapon stocks. What this means is that within the current decade, we may well be able to announce the complete elimination of all declared stockpiles. More than any other program to eliminate chemical weapons, the Syria mission has put the OPCW through its paces. The figure I just cited, 98% of all declared chemical weapon stocks destroyed, was achieved in little less than a year after the historic decision by the OPCW's Executive Council on 27 September 2013 on the elimination program for Syria. The Syria mission has amply demonstrated just how effective a regime it is that we operate even in the unprecedented circumstances of an active conflict. It has also demonstrated that our member states can operate in the spirit of the Convention to extend the strict letter of the Convention. Specifically, under the Convention's provisions, it is the responsibility of chemical weapon possessive states to destroy their stockpiles and production facilities at their own cost and on their own territory. However, states parties agreed in the case of Syria with the US Security Council support in Resolution 2118 that a request by Syria for most of its declared weapons to be removed and destroyed outside of the country. And to keep up the operational tempo, more than 35 of our member states, and among them the Czech Republic, came together not only to finance this mission, but also to provide vital technical support. This ranged from providing maritime transport and naval escorts to establishing a sea-based destruction platform and hosting land-based destruction operations. Whatever differences of opinion have marred international efforts to resolve the conflict in Syria, all of our members worked together to achieve Syria's chemical demilitarization. The US-Russia Framework Agreement on elimination of Syrian chemical weapons concluded in Geneva was a crucial launching pad for this international effort, providing, as it did, the foundation for the OPCW Executive Council's decision. This same spirit of cooperation was in evidence in the recent Executive Council decision on the reports of the fact-finding mission, whose initial draft was prepared by Russia and the United States. The speed with which we were able to implement the Syrian destruction program in cooperation with states parties and the United Nations was not at the expense of attention to detail. Our experts continue to seek further clarification from Syrian officials on their initial declaration through 6 visits to Damascus so far, as well as to several sites in question. After some delays, we have also been able to verify the destruction of the first of 12 former chemical production facilities declared by Syria, with destruction operations well underway at several of the remaining facilities. And the fact-finding mission that I established last April to investigate allegations of chlorine, use of chlorine, continues its work. Its second report concluded with a high degree of confidence that chlorine was used regularly and systematically in 3 villages in northern Syria. While states parties understand that the mission is not mandated to identify perpetrators of these attacks, they have left no doubt as to their deep concerns over its conclusions and their unwillingness to tolerate use of chemical weapons in any circumstances. But our success at the operational level goes well beyond accounting for weapons destroyed. As I noted elsewhere, disarmament is not just about securing the absence of weapons, it's a much more broadly based endeavor that seeks to prevent such weapons from ever re-emerging. This in itself is a much wider challenge than what we traditionally understand as non-proliferation, that is, stopping dual-use materials and technologies being sourced for weaponization purposes. In the case of the multifaceted work of the OPCW, efforts to prevent the re-emergence of chemical weapons range from more conventional forms of monitoring and control to efforts to empower an ever broader community of stakeholders to assist implementation of the Convention in all its aspects. For example, our member states are obliged to open up their industrial facilities to routine inspections and to declare transfers of scheduled chemicals to underpin secure trade in dual-use chemicals. Our consultative networks, most importantly, the OPCW Scientific Advisory Board, help us stay on top of advances in science and technology that could impact on how we undertake verification and other measures to implement the Convention. Our coordination of assistance and protective measures provides states parties with better assurances in responding to chemical attacks or accidental releases of toxic chemicals. Our facilitation of exchanges of information and best practices on a wide range of issues, including more recently on chemical safety and security standards, has created effective peer networks. And our training and assistance programs aimed at fostering international cooperation on peaceful use of chemistry have made clear the social and economic benefits that can accrue from chemical applications in consumer production, agriculture, and human health. To better support all these spheres of activity, we have also sought to expand and better target our education and outreach endeavors. We are seeking to help not only states parties, national authorities better understand what it is that we do, but also industry, universities, schools, and civil society. By expanding and marketing our range of materials and tools, such as e-learning modules, We hope to empower more individuals and entities to promote a message of responsible science, in the service of peace. As Václav Havel once noted, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. We are certain that our message makes sense, but we are also determined to make sure it turns out well. The onus is now on us, all of us, to ensure our disarmament gains are made permanent. This will be a deepening challenge, least of all because of the changing strategic landscape of globalization, rapid scientific advances, and the malevolent intentions of non-state actors. To meet this challenge, we will need to convert our past successes into future ones. And to do this, we will need to shift the focus of our activities, adapt our methods, and broaden our stakeholder communities. I am confident that we are well placed to do so with the support of our states parties. Let me conclude by expressing our deep gratitude, the gratitude of the OPCW to the Czech Republic, which has been contributing to the implementation of the Convention, not only by its own compliance, but also by assisting other states parties to do so. In fact, the OPCW experts, our inspectors, have greatly benefited from the Czech Republic's training offers, opportunities, and also the Czech Republic has provided great support for the training capabilities of our states parties experts. So we thank them very much for this, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm pleased to answer your questions if you have any, or comments. Yeah, I will be pleased to listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General, for this comprehensive lecture. I now look around whether there are any questions, comments, requests for the floor, or has the Director General made everything clear to the audience? Perhaps while people may still digest what has been presented, I may first of all thank the Director General for his kind words and confirm that the Czech Republic indeed tries to be a responsible and active member of the OPCW, contributing also with our share, especially with the training centers and financially as well. Then perhaps then I'll really abuse my moderator's role and put the first question to you, Director General, because we've touched briefly, and you did as well, on your outreach efforts towards chemical industry. But this is a field where people from the outside know very little about how this actually operates. So if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more of how you get in touch with them, what would you discuss with them, what is their responses, and how do you make progress together? That would be most welcome. Thank you.
The routine verification mechanism which is in place included in the Convention is aimed at ensuring that the chemical industrial activities in our states parties, in fact, are fully in line with the obligations of our member countries, and they are only for peaceful use of chemistry. Our inspectors are visiting every year 241 different sites, randomly selected through a software in different parts of the world. So there are at the moment 84 countries which declared such industrial plans, and they receive regular inspections, up to 20 per year per country. For instance, China, which hosts at the moment 1,500 of such facilities out of 5,000 which are declared, also receives only 20 inspections per year. Of course, the countries, for instance, like the Czech Republic, which declared over 30 such facilities, do receive through 1 or 2 inspections per year. And these are routine inspections, very short visits, and our inspectors go and verify the documents as well as make a visit to the facility in order to determine that all activities are accurately reflected in the declarations which are submitted to the OPCW. And in order to develop this verification mechanism, in fact, the chemical industry had participated in 1980s and early 90s to the negotiations of the convention to make sure that the industry was also satisfied with this mechanism, and which would also to make sure that it doesn't disrupt the daily activities of the industry. And since then, the cooperation with the global chemical industry has been continuing. And recently, we have decided to formalize this cooperation through an exchange of letters between the Global Chemical Industry Association, ICCA, which is located in Brussels, and the OPCW, and hopefully we'll do it very, very soon. Apart from 2 big countries, China and India, all other state parties, in fact, are members of the association, and those 2 countries are observers at the moment. So they may be separately represented in this new cooperation mechanism. And our aim is, in fact, to represent the organization and to ensure a cross-representation in our activities, to develop some joint activities, especially in the field of chemical safety and security. These are, in fact, according to experts, very similar. If we are able to develop a certain capacity for chemical safety management, as well as security, then it would be, in fact, in the interest of all state parties, especially in view of the changing security environment. The bigger companies are able to do it with their own resources, but small and medium enterprises are less. So this is going to be our target area, jointly with the chemical industry associations. So that's how we envisage, in fact, our future cooperation with the chemical industry. And similarly, we want to develop further our cooperation with the scientific communities, like the chemical societies in the United States, within the European Union, and Asia, and so on, in order to actually promote together the scientific ethical standards, and to develop together perhaps a code of conduct for scientists for responsible science. In the past, during the First World War, in fact, very eminent scientists had developed chemical weapons, and sulfur mustard, which was widely used during the First World War. And we have seen in the past that science is, in fact, like a double-edged sword, so it may be misused. Therefore, the purpose is really to promote worldwide, globally, the use of science in a responsible way. And this requires clearly collective efforts. So the OPCW is really willing to be part of this new endeavor. In that context, I should add that we are going to commemorate very soon the centenary of the first centennial anniversary of the first massive use of chemical weapons in Ypres, Belgium. So on 21st April we will organize an event there, and the purpose is also not only to commemorate, of course, the victims, but also to issue a declaration, solemn declaration, reaffirming the determination of our state parties to prevent any use of chemical weapons in the future.
Many thanks for this elaboration. Yes, please. From Azerbaijan.
Okay. My name is Tural. I represent the Embassy of Azerbaijan in Prague. I would like to join thanking Ambassador Üzümcü for visiting Prague and delivering this lecture in front of us. So my question is related to the trafficking or possible illegal trafficking in chemical weapons. It's a well-known fact that there are some gray zones or uncontrolled territories all over the world, which is used by international illegal traffickers or terrorist groups in trafficking human beings, drugs, or possibly chemical weapons. So the countries that I am coming from, the Republic of Azerbaijan, whose territories, 20% of the territories still under occupation. There is no guarantee that such gray zones or uncontrolled territories are not used by those terrorist groups or illegal traffickers in stockpiling, keeping, or transferring such kind of chemical weapons. And what is the mechanism that your organization has for preventing such trafficking issues to occur? And what is the role that, as a Director General of the organization you can play to make aware the international community and the mechanisms that you can apply to prevent all these negative happenings? Thank you very much.
CWC regime is in fact a regime which functions on the basis of declarations by our state parties. State parties have the obligation to declare to the OPCW their exports and imports of a certain category of chemical materials which are dual use. And our job is, the job of our experts is to compare those declarations, and if there are discrepancies, they raise questions with the concerned state parties in order to reconcile them. And the overall aim is to prevent, in fact, any diversion of those chemicals. In addition to that, of course, we organize some capacity building activities in order to reinforce the capabilities of our member states to prevent such diversions. And we work with other relevant agencies like World Customs Organization, for instance, to train the custom officers so that they have the ability to monitor these movements and to prevent if there is some suspected activity. As to the territories which are not controlled, which may not be controlled by state parties, clearly the OPCW has no ability to enforce the convention in those territories, in those places. But you mentioned the non-state actors, terrorist groups. In fact, when the convention was negotiated, the terrorist threat was not really on the top of the agenda of the international community, and you won't see any mention of non-state actors nor terrorists in the convention. The general approach followed by the state parties is that the full and effective implementation of the convention by all state parties or each state party would in itself be a contribution to counter-terrorism efforts. And there would be many state parties who would argue that, in fact, that the OPCW is not an anti-terrorism organization. Having said that, we have an open-ended working group on terrorism, which was established after 9/11 in 2001, which provides a platform for exchange of views or sharing best practices amongst state parties. We have some cooperation with the relevant UN agencies, as well as 1540 committee. We participate in their events, they participate in ours. And we continue to develop such cooperation. For instance, excuse me, we are at the moment working with several UN agencies to develop an emergency response mechanism which would involve different agencies, including OPCW if there is a chemical use. Through this mechanism, we want to be able to operate together and in a swift manner and react and using our resources as well as resources of other organizations and relevant countries. So that's an important project from our point of view, which we want to pursue in the coming months. But especially in view of what's happening in Syria and Iraq recently, the state parties do realize that this threat of terrorism and possibly chemical terrorism will be in place for some time to come, and therefore I expect that this issue will be further discussed within the organization and some further measures will be considered.
Thanks, Director General. I see some other colleagues interested in posing a question. There is this side? Yes, please, colleague.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for a very interesting and comprehensive lecture. My name is Alois and I'm from the Non-Proliferation Department of the State Office for Nuclear Safety. You mentioned in your lecture that the fact-finding mission into the alleged use of chlorine in Syria confirmed these allegations, if I understood it correctly. And I was wondering if you could expand or elaborate on the outcomes of this mission. Thank you.
Last year in April, there were reports about the allegations of use of chlorine in different parts of Syria, and chlorine is clearly not a weapon, a chemical weapon as such, but according to our convention, any chemical substance which could be used for hostile purposes is considered as a chemical weapon. And in this context, in the context of the general purpose criterion, as we call it, the use of chlorine would be seen as a violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Two, there were actually two possibilities, and one possibility would be that any state party could invoke the mechanism of investigation of alleged use, which didn't happen. And then we thought over it, and we thought that this organization could not remain indifferent to such allegations. And we found a formula which is actually not foreseen by the convention, but a softer version than the investigation. And we established a small team, and I asked the Syrian authorities, in fact, to be cooperative, to accept the team to be deployed to Damascus with a view to going to the sites of alleged use. And the Syrians, after a week or 10 days, accepted the deployment of the team, which we did. And while they were in Damascus, there were some new allegations, and unfortunately the attempt to go to Kafr Zita, which is one of the villages of alleged use, actually more than once, on 27th May, they tried to go there, but they were attacked in the buffer zone. and this mission was aborted, and they had to go back to Damascus, then from Damascus to the Hague. Later, 2 months later, in fact, the team was deployed to a neighboring country, to Syria, where alleged victims were brought. So where the staff who treated them, and based on their accounts and witness accounts, the reports were developed. Some state parties have been critical of those reports because they argued that the on-site, in fact, verification was not carried out, samples were not collected, and so on. Therefore, the findings of this team would be disputable. But others argued that this corroborated, in fact, the information they were able to collect from different sources. Still, in spite of this divergent views, just on 4th of February, after 2 weeks of discussions and deliberations within the Executive Council, the Council was able to take a decision strongly condemning the use of chlorine as a toxic chemical or weapon, and reaffirming their determination, in fact, conviction that those who used it should be held accountable, and reaffirmation that such incidents should not recur, and continuing to work together in all those areas. So the findings of the in fact mission were somehow endorsed by state parties. The decision was not taken by consensus, was voted, but only one country voted against it. This also shows the near consensus among state parties, the unanimous view. So I believe that this also shows, in fact, the unanimous stand taken by state parties against the use of CWs or toxic weapons, which is, from my point of view, is very important. And state parties asked me to maintain this mission for the future if there are new allegations, to continue to investigate them.
Thank you. And perhaps one last chance, due to time constraints, if somebody still wishes Director General to explain. Yes, please, gentlemen.
It's Karl Schmischka from the Institute of International Relations in Prague. I'd also like to thank Director General for an excellent presentation. I have a more of a general question at the end. It's clear from your presentation that your organization is sort of represents global governance at its best, or multilateral cooperation at its best. So I wonder if there are any lessons to be learned from the history of the organization, the negotiations, convention, and the actual working of the organization for other areas, security-related areas of global governance. What would be the sort of potentially transferable lessons to learn elsewhere?
I think in particular the verification mechanism of the OPCW is seen as a good model by many. As you may know, Biological Weapons Convention, which is in fact goes back to an earlier stage than the CWC, has been in place for several years now, but they don't have a verification mechanism nor a secretariat for the implementation of the convention. This rather is functioning like a confidence-building regime. And many observers, in fact, do believe that the verification mechanism in the context of the CWC could be a good model for an eventual nuclear disarmament. And there have been some papers, in fact, which are produced by experts, disarmament experts. So we don't know when it's going to happen. nuclear disarmament process, but if it happens one day, I think this may be used. But in general, especially in the field of non-proliferation, whatever we do in the CWC context, I believe does help also to reinforce the other non-proliferation mechanisms concerning the nuclear as well as biological. I mentioned earlier the capacity building activities for customs authorities. So for instance, this shows, and in many cases, especially in smaller countries, the nuclear, biological and chemical non-proliferation activities are being run by single agencies, within which some departments do exist. So this also helps us, in fact, to address them to them, and as well as to involve them in our activities and reinforce each other's. I think in the future, especially since we are going to focus more on non-proliferation or prevention of re-emergence, as we call it, and less on disarmament, because the existing stockpiles will be destroyed within the next 4 to 5 years. I believe that we can cooperate further with the other two processes, biological or nuclear. We have some cooperation already with IAEA and also biological unit in Geneva, and in fact to organize perhaps some joint activities and build capacities in our state parties.
Many thanks. And I don't see any pressing raise of hands. I will then thank the Director General Ahmet Üzümcü for his excellent presentation. Thanks for being with us today. And thanks to all of you for showing your interest in chemical weapons and disarmament, including prevention. And we do hope to see you at the nearest next occasion. Have a good evening and what goodbye to you. Bye.